January 2009, Reno, Nevada. A 19-year-old college student goes to sleep on a friend's couch during winter break and is never seen alive again. In the morning, the front door is ajar. Her boots, jacket, and phone are still in the apartment, and on the pillow where her head had rested, police discover a faint bloodstain. For weeks, Reno searched in fear until a single orange sock led investigators to her body in an abandoned lot outside Sparks. DNA revealed the chilling truth. This was not the first attack, but the work of a serial predator hiding in plain sight. Tonight, we reopen the case file that shook Nevada to its core and trace how one anonymous tip finally unmasked the Nevada Phantom. If you're drawn to true crime and unsolved mysteries, subscribe now, hit the notification bell, and join us as we uncover the story behind one of Nevada's most haunting cold cases. January 2009. Reno, Nevada. The kind of winter night that settles over the city like a cold, silent verdict, everything glazed in frost, streets shining under sodium lamps, even the sagebrush and distant mountains holding their breath. College kids had scattered home for winter break. The campus at the University of Nevada mostly empty, but a few dorm lights still burned, holding pockets of life against the dark. Hannah Carter had never really fit the mold of a party girl, but she was warm, earnest, and curious, the kind of person who drew others in. At 19, she'd just finished her first semester as a sociology major. Restless, bright, still homesick for Las Vegas, but determined to make her mark up north. Her brown hair framed a face made for open smiles, her blue eyes full of questions. She had stayed in Reno over the break, planning to pick up shifts at a coffee shop and catch up on readings. But life has a way of turning the most ordinary decisions into the start of something irreversible. That Friday night, the city was hushed by snowfall, and everyone moved slower, bundled up, breaths steaming in the air. Hannah's friend, Natalie Kim, had invited her to a small get-together at her place just off campus, a cramped apartment with thrift store furniture and Christmas lights tangled in the window, their colors reflected in half-empty soda bottles. It was nothing wild. Two friends playing cards, someone scrolling through a playlist, cheap pizza on paper plates. The laughter was soft, the energy winding down by midnight as the storm thickened outside. Around 1:00 a.m., Hannah claimed the couch, Natalie's old, sagging sofa with a threadbare fleece blanket, while Natalie and another friend retreated to the back room. They exchanged sleepy goodnights. Hannah scrolled her phone, replied to a quick text from her brother. "All good. Snow's crazy. See you soon." Then dropped the device on the coffee table. She yawned, shivering a little, and pulled the blanket up over her shoulder. The world faded out. First the glow of the TV, then the glow of consciousness itself. But some nights refused to pass quietly. No one in the apartment would remember hearing anything strange. The wind howled, ice clicked against the windows. A freight train wailed in the distance. Reno's shadows are deep, and its silences can hide 1,000 secrets. What happened between midnight and dawn would become a matter for detectives, psychics, conspiracy forums, and anxious parents. But it started with something so slight that no one even noticed. Natalie awoke late, the weak January sun barely pushing through gray clouds. She shuffled into the living room, half asleep, searching for coffee and company. The front door, normally deadbolted, stood ajar, drifting gently with every draft of frigid air. For a moment, she assumed Hannah had left early, maybe for a walk, but the weather was brutal, and Hannah's boots sat by the door, laces still neatly tied. Her purse and jacket lay where she'd tossed them, phone still charging on the table, untouched. The blanket was balled up on the couch. Panic arrived slowly, like the first taste of metal on the tongue. Natalie called out. Once, then twice. She checked the bathroom, peered into the hallway. No Hannah. Back in the living room, she stared at the sofa, its cushions sagging, the pillow still indented from a head that had rested there hours ago. That's when she noticed it. A faint, rusty brown stain on the pillowcase, smaller than a quarter, nearly lost in the fabric's floral pattern. She touched it and recoiled, dried blood. Her hands began to shake. It was a scene out of every nightmare, the kind you read about and dismiss, certain it would never find its way into your life. But here it was. Natalie's voice broke as she dialed 911, tripping over her own explanation. My friend was here. She was just here. The door was open. There's blood. She's gone, please. Something happened, please. Within half an hour, police cruisers idled outside, blue and red lights painting the snowdrifts in harsh colors. Neighbors peered out from behind curtains. The apartment became a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape, officers moving with solemn efficiency, snapping photos, dusting surfaces, collecting stray hairs and fingerprints. Every minute seemed to stretch, every second a mounting accusation. They combed through the apartment and questioned Natalie and her roommate again and again. Did you hear anything? Did you see anything? Was she depressed, angry, planning to meet anyone? The answers were always the same. No, no, no. Hannah wasn't the type to just vanish. She was cautious, careful, a creature of habit and routine. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing footprints, muffling sounds, swallowing any evidence left behind. The city was just beginning to stir. Another ordinary morning turned extraordinary by tragedy. By noon, word had spread to campus. Hannah's family, her mother and stepfather, arrived in a blur of fear and disbelief. They pressed officers for answers, demanding action, demanding hope. All of Hannah's things remained in that apartment: her boots, her jacket, her wallet, and her phone, buzzing with worried messages that would go forever unanswered. No one had seen her leave. No one had heard a struggle. It was as if she had been plucked from the world by some invisible hand. But in the darkness, something terrible had moved, leaving behind a single, silent trace. A spot of blood on a pillow where a girl had closed her eyes, never to open them again. That was the night Hannah Carter vanished. A night that would haunt Reno for years to come. The disappearance of Hannah Carter hit the city of Reno with a chilling clarity the moment it was reported. The story made the morning news before the snow had finished melting off car hoods. Her parents' faces, pale, shell-shocked, were broadcast alongside her graduation photo, her smile frozen in time. The first 24 hours were chaos. Calls to friends, social media posts, flyers made in the trembling hands of her family and taped up in coffee shops and libraries. But nothing made sense because everything that marked Hannah's existence was still at the apartment. Her boots, her faded canvas wallet, her winter jacket, her cell phone that rang and rang and rang. Each ring felt like a countdown. Police worked quickly, the cold and the bloodstain sharpening their sense of urgency. Hannah's family pressed for more, but there was little to say. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, and no surveillance footage showing her leaving. Natalie, the friend who hosted her, gave her statement over and over, her voice cracking at the edges. The detectives nodded, scribbled, asked the same questions from different angles, trying to trip the truth loose from somewhere. But Natalie had nothing more to offer than fear. Within hours, search teams were mobilized. The university campus transformed. Students who had been away for break rushed back to help. Hannah's classmates and professors organized search parties, pairing up and combing the campus and its frozen sidewalks, calling her name, checking behind dumpsters, peering into shadows and abandoned cars, flyers bearing her face multiplied on telephone poles and bus shelters. Missing Hannah Carter, age 19, last seen, Jan 10, 2009. Her mother's cell phone number printed at the bottom, a silent plea. The Reno police joined forces with the FBI as the search widened. The team quickly realized they weren't just dealing with a runaway or a homesick college freshman. They were in the grip of something darker. Forensic vans crowded the apartment complex parking lot. Officers canvassed neighboring units, knocking on every door in the early morning cold. Some neighbors remembered hearing sirens. Others claimed to see nothing at all. One said he saw a shadow moving quickly down the hallway around 3:00 a.m., but couldn't recall more. Another reported a strange vehicle idling nearby. A silver pickup, unfamiliar, headlights off, engine murmuring in the dark. But no license plate number, no identifying details. Outside, the search extended to the city's veins. The leafless campus quad, the dim bars, the sprawling parking garages. Along the icy banks of the Truckee River, volunteers in neon vests picked through reeds and debris, following the winding waterway for miles. Local news crews set up their tripods at every intersection, cameras scanning crowds, amplifying the panic. Students who had known Hannah barely, or not at all, joined the search, driven by something primal, a sense that the threat could reach any one of them next. As the days crawled by, hope dimmed and desperation took root. Police combed through Hannah's digital life, her emails, her texts, her social media feeds, trying to find any hint of a plan, a secret boyfriend, a threat. There was nothing. Only the ordinary web of college friendships, photos from Halloween, plans for spring break, reminders for class, a perfectly normal life, interrupted by violence. Hannah's family found themselves walking unfamiliar roads, handing out flyers at supermarkets and gas stations, speaking to anyone who would listen. Her mother made tearful appeals on TV. Her stepfather's jaw clenched in every interview. Hannah's younger brother stood with them, silent and lost. Every morning they woke hoping for news. Every night they went to bed shattered by the lack of it. The search grew to include the forests and industrial lots on the edge of the city, warehouses left to rot behind chain-link fences, motels where nobody asked for your last name. Search dogs and helicopters were deployed, their movements broadcast live, their every turn dissected by amateur sleuths on internet forums. Rumors swirled. Some claimed to see Hannah at a truck stop outside Reno. Others whispered about trafficking, about a lover's quarrel turned deadly. But nothing panned out. The streets grew quieter. Fear spread, insidious and slow. But the one thing nobody could ignore was the way Reno, tough, transient, built on risk, rallied around Hannah Carter. Coffee shop owners offered free drinks to volunteers. Neighbors opened their garages to store donated supplies. Students, who barely knew her, skipped classes to hand out flyers and scour alleyways. Candlelight vigils sprang up on campus lawns, the flickering flames a protest against the darkness settling in. Every new lead brought hope that flared and faded. A piece of clothing found in the river, a wallet left on a bus seat. A girl matching Hannah's description glimpsed at the edge of a casino parking lot. Each time the authorities moved fast. Each time the hope collapsed into disappointment. By the end of the first week, the city was exhausted. Bone deep, soul deep. The kind of tired that comes from waiting for news that never comes. But there were still people searching. Still people refusing to give up. In classrooms, in church basements, in kitchens filled with the smell of burnt coffee and anxiety, strangers became friends, and friends became family. They clung to each other, determined to bring Hannah home. The city was holding its breath, every heart tuned to the same desperate hope that somewhere out there, in the cold Nevada winter, Hannah Carter was still alive. And all the while in the quiet at the heart of the storm, one question repeated itself, an ache beneath every conversation. How could someone vanish so completely and leave behind so much? The days slipped by, winter's grip refusing to loosen on Reno, as search parties dwindled and the news cycle threatened to move on. The police task force digging into Hannah Carter's disappearance refused to let the case grow cold. Their commitment showed in the relentless way they revisited the small apartment where Hannah was last seen, collecting evidence with the grim patience of people who know that, in these cases, the smallest overlooked detail can change everything. Crime scene investigators swept through the living room over and over, focusing on anything that could have slipped through in the panic of the first response. They peeled back layers of the ordinary, stray hairs tangled in the blanket, flakes of mud on the worn carpet, smudges on the door and windowsill. Each new detail was entered into a growing case file, a mountain of evidence and dead ends. Then, days after Hannah's disappearance, the forensics team found something on the front doorknob, a trace of DNA that didn't match Hannah or any of her friends. At first, it seemed almost insignificant. Friends, roommates, neighbors, delivery drivers. The world leaves its fingerprints everywhere. But the same unknown male DNA appeared on the edge of the blanket Hannah had pulled up over her shoulders that night. The blanket, washed and rewarmed countless times, had somehow preserved a fragment of the person who had last touched it. 2 locations, 2 small samples, both belonging to the same unidentified man. Investigators felt the tremor of possibility. They ran the DNA through the National CODIS database, hoping for a hit, a name, a record, some thread that would pull this faceless shadow into the light. The result came back. No match. Whoever had left those traces had never been arrested for a felony, had never been compelled to give a DNA sample to law enforcement. For a moment, the promise of a breakthrough slipped away. But the new clue forced detectives to look at the broader pattern of violence in the area. The previous autumn had seen a string of assaults near campus. 2 attacks, both victims female, both incidents occurring late at night, both cases unresolved and quietly haunting the university community. The detectives in charge of Hannah's case went back over the files, their suspicions sharpening as the evidence lined up. The locations, the methods, the proximity to the university, and now, the DNA. Forensics confirmed what the detectives had begun to fear. The unknown male DNA left at Hannah's crime scene matched the DNA found on both victims from the unsolved assaults. It was a chilling revelation. A serial predator had been moving in the shadows of Reno, striking when the city slept, always vanishing without a trace. Now, with Hannah gone, the cases were no longer just about fear. They had become a matter of life and death. The weight of this realization settled like a dark cloud over the investigation. There was now no question that Hannah's disappearance was the work of a repeat offender, someone organized, careful, emboldened by the failure to catch him before. The stakes had escalated. No longer was the investigation focused solely on Hannah. It had become a desperate race to stop the unknown man before he struck again. Detectives pored over camera footage from the surrounding blocks, hoping for a glimpse of a face, a license plate, any sign of a silver pickup truck rumored to have been seen in the area on the night Hannah vanished. The footage was grainy, and the angles were poor, shadows moving in and out of the snowy haze, headlights passing along empty streets, but never long enough to reveal the identity of the driver. Interviews were conducted again with witnesses who had mentioned the pickup, but memory is a fragile thing, especially in the aftermath of fear. As word spread of the potential serial predator, anxiety gripped the campus in new ways. Police began meeting with university officials, outlining safety protocols. The media, sensing the new twist, amplified the tension, painting the city as a hunting ground for a faceless monster. Female students shared warnings in group chats and dorm meetings. Tips poured into the police hotline, but most were false leads or wild speculation. Yet, in the detective bullpen, the atmosphere was charged with determination. They pored over maps, tracing the routes between the prior assaults and the apartment where Hannah vanished. They reconstructed timelines, comparing the victims' routines, searching for overlap or coincidence. With every passing day, the sense of urgency grew sharper. Volunteers and searchers, hearing rumors of the DNA link, doubled down on their efforts. They returned to the riverbank and campus, convinced the perpetrator might have left behind something crucial. Some searched in groups, some alone, their hope and fear feeding off each other. Still, nothing else surfaced that could offer a breakthrough. But the DNA had changed the tone of the investigation. This was no longer a missing person case with a faint chance of a runaway. This was a hunt for a predator who was not finished, a man whose crimes were now linked by irrefutable science, and who had become more dangerous with each attack. For the Carter family, the new clue was both a nightmare and a twisted hope. At least, they reasoned, someone was responsible, someone who could be caught, someone who could answer for what had been done. But for Hannah's friends and the city itself, the discovery shattered any illusion of safety. Every open door, every shadowed parking lot, every passing truck became a threat. And above it all, the question grew louder. Who was the man hiding behind the DNA, moving through the city like a phantom? How many nights had he spent hunting in silence, watching from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike? In Reno, the search for Hannah Carter had become the search for a ghost, one whose crimes left just enough evidence to terrify but never enough to reveal his face. By the end of January, the bitter wind cut through Reno with an edge sharper than before, but it was fear, more than the cold, that kept people inside. With the news of DNA evidence linking Hannah Carter's disappearance to 2 unsolved assaults, a deep sense of unease rippled through the university and the entire city. Overnight, daily routines warped. Ordinary walks to the campus library now seemed treacherous. The familiar sidewalks transformed into corridors of risk. Dormitory doors, once propped open to let in friends and the occasional stray cat, slammed shut and stayed locked. The student bulletin boards, usually plastered with concert flyers and tutoring offers, were now crowded with police advisories. Travel in groups. Don't walk alone after dark. Be vigilant. Report anything suspicious. Those warnings spread from campus emails to local radio, from hastily printed flyers to whispered conversations in coffee shops. There was an unspoken understanding. Whatever had taken Hannah was still out there, watching, waiting for the next mistake. Parents who had dropped their daughters off in the fall now packed their cars and drove back over snowy passes, determined to bring them home, if only for a few weeks. Others demanded the university tighten security, threatened to withdraw tuition unless safety was guaranteed. The university responded by doubling patrols and requiring students to show ID at building entrances, but it did little to calm the nerves. The sense of threat was everywhere, palpable, heavy, impossible to ignore. Female students became the main targets of concern. Group texts exploded with late-night check-ins. Pepper spray sales soared. Girls clung to each other, crossing campus in tight knots, eyes darting to every stranger and passing car. Nobody wanted to be the next headline, the next face on a missing flyer. The city, already haunted by its casinos and lost fortunes, now grappled with a different kind of gamble. The possibility that anyone could become prey. The media gave the unknown assailant a name that sent a chill through every home: the Nevada Phantom. It was a moniker that stoked imagination and dread in equal measure. Newspapers described him as a shadow with a silver pickup truck, a predator with a talent for vanishing. TV anchors repeated the nickname with somber gravity, their voices looping the phrase late into the night. The Phantom became both myth and monster, an idea that lived in every creak of a dormitory floorboard, every unexplained sound in the darkness. But the terror wasn't confined to campus. In the neighborhoods around the university, porch lights flickered on and stayed on even after midnight. Grocery store clerks eyed customers with suspicion. Strangers in bars became suspects. Watched by anxious regulars and jittery bartenders, the smallest details took on sinister meaning. A pair of boots left by the curb, an unfamiliar car circling a block. A woman swore she saw a man duck behind a dumpster at 2:00 a.m. Someone else reported a shadowy figure near the railroad tracks, always slipping away before police could arrive. Investigators chased leads at a furious pace, spurred on by the growing public pressure. Dozens of men who owned silver pickups were questioned. Some followed for days. Local mechanics were asked to report anyone bringing in a scratched fender or broken headlight. But the Phantom remained just out of reach, a master of disappearing acts. Still, certain fragments of that night clung to the investigation. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing a silver pickup truck cruising slowly through the neighborhood around the time Hannah vanished. Some remembered headlights sweeping the curb, the way the truck idled for several minutes at the corner before disappearing down the block. But no one could remember the license plate. When detectives canvassed the area for security footage, they found only a few blurry frames, the shape of a vehicle sliding by, headlights reflected in snow, the rest lost to darkness. Inside the police station, maps of the city grew crowded with pins and notes, lines tracing the movements of every suspicious vehicle reported since autumn. Detectives worked in shifts, sifting through tips, pulling up records for every prior assault near campus, hoping to find a missed connection. The Phantom's pattern was elusive. He struck at night, targeted young women, always left behind just enough evidence to hint at his presence, never enough to catch him. It was a time when every rumor seemed plausible, and every detail, no matter how minor, was magnified by fear. A forgotten scarf on a park bench could spark panic. A woman running to catch a bus might trigger a wave of frantic calls to the police. Trust eroded between neighbors. Strangers in laundromats and grocery stores met each other's eyes warily, searching for the Phantom's face in every crowd. Meanwhile, the Carter family lived inside a nightmare, that never ended. Each day brought new interviews, more press, more speculation, each headline a fresh wound. Hannah's mother appeared on local TV, her voice trembling as she pleaded for information. But the phantom stayed silent, invisible, untouched by all the desperate searching. Outside, Reno waited, anxious and exhausted. The city had become a maze of fear, and somewhere in its tangled streets, the Nevada phantom moved with impunity, his shadow stretching longer with every passing night. The weeks crawled past with a suffocating sense of dread, each day colder than the last, each night darker than anyone remembered. Search parties thinned as winter deepened, but a core of volunteers refused to give up hope. Flyers bearing Hannah Carter's face curled on lampposts, battered by wind and snow, but no one could bear to take them down. She was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost haunting Reno, her story whispered on street corners and murmured in prayers. February brought a different kind of cold, biting and merciless, scraping hope down to its thinnest edge. The Carter family, stretched between fear and exhaustion, clung to any scrap of information. Police continued to comb through leads, analyzing every tip and re-examining every inch of ground around the university, the river, the neighborhoods that radiated out from campus like the rings of a wound. On Valentine's Day, as the city's couples exchanged flowers and the rest tried to forget how lonely winter could be, a worker in an industrial lot on the far edge of Sparks noticed something bright amid the dead brush. He paused, frowning against the wind. There, tangled in brittle grass, was something orange, soft and small, like a child's lost glove. Drawn closer, he saw it for what it was, a single orange sock, stained with mud, partially buried by snow. A woman's sock. The worker's heart hammered with dread as he dialed 911, stumbling over his words, unable to look away. Police arrived within minutes, fanning out across the desolate lot, boots crunching on frozen gravel, radios crackling. The orange sock became the center of a grim constellation. Footprints, drag marks, a scrap of cloth half hidden under a log. And then, just beyond the tree line, in a shallow depression masked by dead weeds, they found what everyone had feared since that first frantic morning. Hannah's body, battered and silent, covered in snow and silence. The site became a frenzy of activity, officers calling in the discovery, crime scene tapes snapping in the wind, forensics teams moving with grim precision. Reporters, sensing tragedy, arrived before the sun had fully set, their vans parked in a silent row, headlights illuminating the brush and the broken fence. The city held its breath as the details trickled out. The medical examiner's report would later reveal what most already knew in their hearts. Hannah had been assaulted and murdered. The violence was undeniable, her final hours marked by pain and fear that echoed through every page of the report. But even these facts, horrifying as they were, could not fully capture the reality of loss. The Carter family's world shattered, grief swallowing them whole, their hope replaced by a cold, hollow ache that could never be filled. News of Hannah's discovery traveled fast, rippling through campus and the city like a shockwave. Classes were canceled, vigils were organized, students gathered in hushed groups, their faces streaked with tears and disbelief. In the center of the University of Nevada campus, hundreds of candles were lit as night fell, each one a protest against the darkness, a stubborn act of memory and defiance. Hannah's friends, some barely holding themselves together, placed flowers and photos at the base of a statue near the student union. Strangers left notes. "We won't forget you. You deserved better. Justice for Hannah." The gathering swelled as the hours passed, flickering candlelight reflecting in tear-filled eyes. The Carter family stood surrounded by classmates, faculty, and neighbors, each person trying in their own way to shoulder a fraction of the burden. The investigation now shifted into a higher gear, the city's grief fueling new determination. Detectives revisited every scrap of evidence, every possible witness, every fragment of a timeline. The crime scene in Sparks was mapped and photographed, every fiber and fingerprint cataloged. The forensics team collected soil samples, searching for traces of the perpetrator, a single hair, a thread, a drop of blood. Somewhere in the evidence, they believed, was the key to unlocking Hannah's case and ending the Nevada Phantom's reign of terror. But for most, the discovery brought only questions and pain. How could someone do this? How could they walk free while a family was left shattered, a city left trembling? In classrooms, professors struggled to find words. Students held each other a little tighter, the shared loss knitting them together in a web of sorrow and resolve. That night, as Reno's lights glittered beneath a cloudless sky, the university bell tolled for Hannah. Each ring echoed across the quad, a sound that seemed to go on forever, cutting through the hush that had settled over the city. It was a sound that called for justice, for closure, for a world in which such tragedies were unthinkable. The case of Hannah Carter had gone from a missing persons search to a homicide investigation. But more than that, it had become a test of a community's spirit, of its willingness to come together, to remember, to refuse to let one life be swallowed by silence. In the weeks to come, the city would find strength in grief, and the hunt for the Nevada Phantom would enter a new and desperate phase. The city mourned Hannah Carter in ways that were both visible and invisible. Grief settled over Reno like a late frost, burning deep into every household, every coffee shop, every dorm room. Yet beneath the sorrow, something else began to grow, a fierce demand for answers. Reno's police, now joined by federal agents and forensic specialists, redoubled their efforts. The Nevada Phantom was no longer a rumor or an urban legend. He was real, and the entire community was calling for justice. The turning point arrived in a sterile lab, far from the campus vigils and haunted neighborhoods. There, behind locked doors and humming equipment, forensic scientists continued their meticulous work. They cross-referenced every item found at the Sparks crime scene, with samples collected from Hannah's body, from the blood-stained pillow, and from the earlier campus assaults. It was painstaking labor, pipettes, centrifuges, endless rows of labeled vials. But modern science, unlike grief, works to a pattern. It promises answers where human memory and intuition fail. The DNA results came back with a cold certainty that left no room for doubt. The same unidentified male DNA found on Hannah's blanket and doorknob was now found on her body. More chillingly, it matched the DNA profile from the 2 unsolved sexual assaults near campus the previous autumn. The evidence was now irrefutable. The Nevada Phantom had struck before and had done so with a pattern, a dark ritual, a confidence born of going uncaught. Word of the match swept through the police department, electrifying detectives and deepening their resolve. The cases, once siloed, treated as separate, isolated tragedies, were now threads in a single horrifying tapestry. It became clear they were dealing with a serial predator, someone organized and methodical, capable of blending in and waiting for opportunity. He had chosen his moments with precision, hunting in the shadows, always leaving behind just enough evidence to hint at his presence, but never enough to reveal his identity. The new evidence reignited public outrage and fear. The university posted flyers everywhere, this time with a new headline: Serial Predator on the Loose. A large reward was announced. Money raised by desperate families, local businesses, and even anonymous donors. The promise was clear. Any information, any detail, might be the missing piece to end the city's nightmare. Flyers multiplied across Reno and Sparks. Bus stops, laundromats, grocery stores, and bar bathrooms were plastered with Hannah's face and the faces of the other victims. Social media campaigns went viral. The hashtag #justice for Hannah trending regionally for weeks. Students organized new safety patrols, and pepper spray became as common as textbooks in backpacks. The university, its reputation and very soul at stake, hosted forums and workshops on self-defense and situational awareness. Yet nothing could erase the anxiety. Fear lingered in the halls and parking lots, refusing to leave. Detectives worked around the clock, reviewing every report from the past 6 months. Each tip was logged, followed up, mapped. They created a profile of the phantom, male, likely local, with enough knowledge of the area to move undetected. The detail about the silver pickup truck became central. Lists of registered vehicles were pulled, names checked and double-checked. Mechanics and body shops were questioned. Had anyone brought in a truck with suspicious damage? Still, the man behind the DNA remained a ghost, taunting the city with his invisibility. For Hannah's family, the revelations brought no comfort. The knowledge that their daughter had not been the phantom's first victim was a new wound, a violation that kept them up at night. Still, they appeared at every vigil and press conference, their grief evolving into determination. "Someone knows something," Hannah's mother said, her voice broadcast across Reno, trembling but unbroken. "Please, if you saw anything, if you remember anything, come forward." Tips began to pour in once again. Some were wild theories, fueled by fear and rumor. Others seemed promising. Sightings of suspicious vehicles, accounts of a strange man lingering near bus stops, stories of a neighbor who suddenly changed his routine. Each one was catalogued, some dismissed quickly, others held back for deeper investigation. The phantom, meanwhile, seemed to melt into the background. He changed nothing, left no new victims, became a living reminder of the city's vulnerability. Yet the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. Students hurried across campus even in daylight. Police presence was impossible to ignore. Marked cars parked at every corner, officers patrolling in pairs. At night, the city felt like a trap, each alley and darkened lot echoing with the memory of loss. But beneath the fear, a kind of stubborn resilience took root. Reno was not about to let its daughters vanish without a fight. Every new flyer, every candle at every vigil, every message shared online was a declaration. "We see you. We are looking. You cannot hide forever." The DNA trail had given the city hope, but hope was a double-edged thing. It cut deep, even as it pointed the way forward. Somewhere in the maze of evidence, the phantom had left enough of himself behind to be found. It was only a matter of time before science and the city's relentless will would bring him out of the shadows. Spring crept into Reno, thawing the snowdrifts and coaxing the first green shoots from the parched Nevada ground. But the warmth did little to lift the weight of fear that still pressed down on the city. The pain of Hannah Carter's murder lingered in every classroom, every living room, every parent's phone call home. As the semester picked up, Caution became a way of life. No one walked alone at night. Roommates waited for each other at campus entrances. Even daylight brought only a fragile sense of safety. Despite the increased patrols, posters, and public pleas, the investigation felt stalled. Detectives worked themselves to exhaustion, chasing down vehicle registrations, re-interviewing witnesses, reviewing months of footage from scattered security cameras. Each promising lead fizzled into nothing. A mechanic who remembered a silver truck with a dented fender. A landlord who'd seen a stranger lurking near dumpsters at midnight. A handful of men with weak alibis, their DNA tested and ruled out. Hope became a distant, flickering thing. The city's anxiety found a rhythm, humming beneath every interaction. Cashiers eyed unfamiliar faces with suspicion. Landlords installed brighter lights and sturdier locks. Yet life ground on as it must. Spring's renewal seemed a cruel reminder that time moved forward, even as the city's grief and fear remained. It was nearly 6 months after Hannah's body was found that the break came. A jarring, unexpected rupture in the silence. The call came in after midnight, when the detectives were in their bullpen, half their faces lit by the bluish glow of computer screens, the rest shadowed by exhaustion and resignation. The dispatcher's voice was tense as she patched the anonymous caller through. A woman's voice, shaky, breathless, almost drowned out by the background buzz of a TV. She wouldn't give her name, but she said she lived in Sparks. Her boyfriend, Jason Miller, a 27-year-old welder, was violent, unpredictable, not right. She'd seen bruises on his arms, anger in his eyes, heard him mutter things he thought she couldn't hear. But it wasn't just his temper that had her terrified. One night, cleaning the back of his silver pickup truck, she'd found a balled-up women's sweatshirt and a pair of unfamiliar tennis shoes. Neither in her size, neither belonging to anyone she knew. Jason's explanations were always thin, impatient. Something about helping a coworker move. But she saw the way he looked at her after she pressed, the warning in his eyes, and she stopped asking questions. She hadn't wanted to believe the rumors, hadn't wanted to get involved, but the guilt weighed heavier every day. The phantom's face haunted her dreams, and the city's grief seeped into her bones. Now, with her voice trembling and tears slipping down her cheek, she said the words the detectives had waited so long to hear. "I think he's the man you're looking for." It was all the officers needed. The detectives moved with a speed and precision born of months of pent-up frustration. Jason Miller's name shot to the top of every watch list. His address was flagged. His truck's license plate circulated among patrol units. Surveillance was set up in shifts. Officers parked in unmarked cars, across from his small apartment building on a dusty Sparks side street. They watched as Jason came and went at odd hours, always alone, always careful. His demeanor was ordinary, almost painfully so. Work boots, faded jeans, a ball cap pulled low. But the unease was impossible to shake. The way he checked his mirrors, the way he lingered in the driver's seat before heading inside, the caution in every movement. Like a man who knew he was being hunted, or who had been living with secrets for too long. For weeks, the surveillance team documented his routine. Jason worked long days at a fabrication shop on the city's edge, kept to himself, rarely spoke to neighbors. His girlfriend, the anonymous caller, moved out soon after the tip, disappearing into her own kind of exile. Officers followed Jason to hardware stores, gas stations, the grocery store at odd hours. He never slipped up, never spoke to anyone who mattered. He was a ghost in plain sight. The detectives wanted to move quickly, but they also knew the risks of tipping their hand too soon. They dug into his past, looking for patterns. A string of speeding tickets, a history of violent arguments with ex-girlfriends, a police report filed years ago but never followed up. The silver pickup was photographed from every angle, and when he parked it behind a locked chain-link fence at work, it was logged with meticulous detail. Behind the scenes, the department coordinated with the FBI and state labs. They needed evidence, hard, undeniable forensic evidence. Something that would stand up in court, something that would ensure Jason Miller could never slip away. In a bold move, investigators managed to collect a discarded soda can used by Jason's young son, left behind at a family picnic. The DNA was compared in secret. The result awaited with held breath. Through those tense days, Reno watched without knowing it was on the cusp of an answer. The case that had consumed a city was suddenly, quietly, at the tipping point. And beneath the hum of fear, a new feeling began to stir, one not felt in months: hope. The city of Reno pulsed with a nervous energy as summer neared. For months, the Nevada phantom had haunted the thoughts of every family, every student, every woman walking home after sunset. Now, quietly and methodically, law enforcement closed the net. The breakthrough, the anonymous call, the silver pickup, the man named Jason Miller, set off a chain of events that felt almost surreal after so much uncertainty. It started with the DNA. After weeks of careful surveillance, detectives managed to recover a soda can Jason's young son had discarded at a public park. The lab worked through the night, comparing the boy's DNA profile to the genetic markers found at the crime scenes. The result arrived just before dawn. The familial match was perfect. The unknown male DNA on Hannah Carter, on the blanket, on the doorknob, matched the genetic signature of Jason's son. The probability was astronomical, beyond reasonable doubt. The Nevada phantom was Jason Miller. Armed with this confirmation, law enforcement prepared to move in. The arrest was planned with military precision. SWAT teams assembled before sunrise in the shadows near Jason's Sparks apartment, their radios crackling softly. Detectives in plain clothes waited in unmarked vehicles, hearts pounding as the hours crept by. They watched the silver pickup glint in the early sun, the vehicle that had haunted their case notes and witness statements for so long. At 7:08 a.m., Jason emerged, keys in hand, face tired, unaware that this day would not unfold like any other. The police converged with sudden force, blocking both ends of the street. Jason froze as the squad cars pulled up, hands instinctively raised as armed officers shouted commands. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He simply stared, blank and silent, as handcuffs snapped around his wrists. Word of the arrest swept through Reno faster than wildfire. News vans appeared outside the police station. Crowds gathered behind yellow tape. Some cheered. Others wept. Many simply stood in stunned silence, as if the city itself was struggling to believe the ordeal was finally ending. On the University of Nevada campus, students traded texts, disbelief and relief, mixing with a kind of exhausted gratitude. Inside Jason's home, the truth emerged in fragments. The search was exhaustive and meticulous. Drawers pulled open, boxes checked, closets and crawl spaces examined inch by inch. Beneath the bed, officers found a locked metal box. Inside were items that would become the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. A collection of women's belongings, each carefully hidden, each a piece of another life shattered by violence. Jewelry, ID cards, scraps of clothing, souvenirs from attacks that had gone unreported, items the victims had likely long since given up hope of recovering. For investigators, the horror was complete. Jason Miller had been collecting mementos, living among the ghosts of his crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Police matched the found objects to reports from other unsolved assaults in the Reno-Sparks area. In the bottom of the box, they found Hannah Carter's student ID, her faded photograph staring up through the plastic, as if demanding justice. There was no doubt. The Nevada Phantom's reign of terror was over. In the interrogation room, Jason faced a wall of evidence. Detectives laid out photographs, DNA results, personal effects. For the first time, he showed cracks in his calm, fidgeting, sweating, his gaze darting to the floor. He never confessed, but he didn't have to. The case built against him was airtight. Every detail corroborated by science, by circumstance, by the chain of pain left in his wake. When the charges were read, kidnapping, sexual assault, murder, his silence became its own admission. News of the arrest spread nationwide. The story of the Nevada Phantom, making headlines from coast to coast. For Reno, it was both an ending and a beginning. There would be trials, there would be years of legal battles, but there was no longer any doubt. Hannah's family, still broken, now had an answer. For them, closure was complicated and incomplete, but at last there was a name, a face, a person who could be held accountable. The university community held another vigil, this one quieter, softer. Candles flickered in the evening breeze. The Carter family stood side by side with other survivors, their grief a visible thread binding them to all who had suffered at the Phantom's hands. Some brought flowers, others brought signs of thanks for the relentless work of investigators. Hope, battered and cautious, began to return to the city. But beneath the surface, the trauma lingered. It would take time, months, years for Reno to trust again, for students to feel safe walking after dark, for parents to sleep through the night without fear. Yet the city had proven something important. When its people came together, when the silent endured and the brave spoke up, even the darkest secrets could be brought into the light. Jason Miller was behind bars. The investigation that began with a single missing girl was over. Yet the lessons, the scars, and the quiet strength that had grown from Hannah's story would endure far longer. A legacy shaped by loss, but also by the will to seek justice. Long after the arrest, as Reno tried to reclaim some sense of normalcy, the story of Hannah Carter's disappearance and murder continued to echo through the city. People talked about the Nevada Phantom in hushed voices at bus stops and kitchen tables, the details settling into the bones of the community. But beneath the swirl of local fear and media spectacle, a quieter, deeper story pulsed, a true story that had haunted Nevada even before Hannah's case. Brianna Dennison was 19 when she vanished, almost exactly a year before the fictional Hannah. She was a real student at the University of Nevada, Reno, bright, ambitious, the kind of young woman whose presence filled a room. In January 2008, Brianna stayed overnight at a friend's house just off campus. Like Hannah, she fell asleep on the couch, surrounded by friends who never imagined danger could slip quietly through a door left ajar. The morning after, Brianna was gone. Her purse, her phone, her jacket, all left behind. A trace of blood on the pillowcase and a window into terror. She had been taken from the safety of her friend's home. As with Hannah, the city was jolted awake, police and volunteers launching an all-out search that gripped Reno and Sparks for weeks. Flyers with Brianna's smile were taped to every pole and mailbox. The university community formed human chains, combed riversides, followed every rumor, clung to every hope. For nearly a month, the city waited for answers that never seemed to come. It was February when a worker in an industrial lot outside Sparks found a scrap of clothing, bright blue, tangled in sagebrush. The discovery led police to a shallow grave where Brianna's body lay, the victim of sexual assault and murder. A sense of collective heartbreak descended, the city moving as one in grief and outrage. But the investigation pressed on. Detectives gathered evidence with the same desperate hope that had driven Hannah's case: fibers, fingerprints, DNA. On Brianna's body and at the scene, they found the genetic signature of her killer. The DNA didn't match anyone in the national database. It was a ghost's fingerprint, a taunt left behind by someone who seemed to know how to vanish. Then, in a moment that changed everything, a critical tip came in, just as it would later for Hannah. A woman in Sparks, frightened for her own safety, called police about her boyfriend, a man named James Biela. She had found women's underwear in his truck, clothing that wasn't hers. Her suspicions, combined with relentless police work, pushed investigators to gather DNA from Biela's young son. The match was immediate, undeniable. James Biela, an Army veteran and construction worker, was arrested. In his apartment, police found the evidence they needed: personal effects belonging to victims, hidden away like gruesome trophies. Faced with the overwhelming proof, Biela never admitted his crimes, but science had already spoken for him. He was charged with kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. His trial drawing national attention, a city's sorrow, now a nation's. In 2010, after a harrowing trial and emotional testimony from family and survivors, James Biela was sentenced to death. The verdict brought a kind of closure, but also left scars: grief that would never fully heal, trauma that rippled through campus life for years. Brianna Dennison's name became more than a headline. It became a symbol of loss and a rallying cry for change. The impact of Brianna's case stretched far beyond the courtroom. Her murder exposed gaps in the law, loopholes that had allowed Biela to avoid suspicion, to slip through the cracks. Outrage transformed into activism. Brianna's family, determined that no other young woman would share her fate, campaigned for reform. Their fight led to the creation of Brianna's Law, a Nevada statute requiring DNA samples from all felony arrestees, not just those convicted. It was a victory born of unimaginable pain, a law written in the hope that science could prevent future tragedies. Even as the years passed, Brianna's story never faded. Her memory was honored in candlelight vigils, scholarships, and advocacy groups pushing for victims' rights. Students walking across campus learned her name alongside the university's history. For every family sending a daughter to college, Brianna's story was a reminder, a warning and a call to vigilance, but also a testament to resilience. In weaving Hannah Carter's case, the community of Reno relived Brianna Dennison's ordeal. The echoes were unmistakable. The late-night abduction, the panicked search, the citywide grief, the forensic breakthrough, the critical tip from someone who found the courage to speak. The legacy of both women stretched out in invisible lines. One fiction, one painfully real, both fueling a resolve that would not let justice slip quietly into the dark. For Reno, and for so many cities like it, the lessons of loss and hope would linger long after the phantom's arrest, shaping a generation's understanding of danger, survival, and the power of community in the face of tragedy. In the months and years after the arrest and trial, Reno became a city transformed, forever marked by the darkness that had touched its streets, yet also by the resilience and unity that tragedy awakened. Hannah Carter's name, like Breonna Dennison's before her, was woven into the fabric of Nevada's history. Where once her memory had brought only sorrow, it now became a spark for change, a rallying point for justice and hope. The shockwaves of Hannah's case continued to ripple outward. The campus where she'd once walked, an ordinary freshman lost in the maze of classes and friendships, now bore silent reminders of what had been endured. The annual candlelight vigil became tradition, not only to mourn what was lost, but to assert what the city had become, a community determined to protect its own, to honor the memory of the innocent, and to ensure that no one's suffering was in vain. Out of grief came action. In the state legislature, Breonna's Law was debated and passed, requiring law enforcement to collect DNA samples from all felony arrestees, not just those convicted. The law, named in Breonna Dennison's honor, was inspired by the same sense of unfinished business that lingered after Hannah's murder. The knowledge that, if the right steps had been taken sooner, other young women might have been spared. The process was neither simple nor swift. There were debates, protests, and resistance from those wary of privacy concerns. Yet in the end, the law's passage was an act of faith. Faith in forensic science, faith in progress, faith that something good could emerge from unimaginable pain. Police training was overhauled, campus security improved. Self-defense seminars and late-night escort services became staples of university life. Student groups advocated for safer dormitories, better lighting, more robust reporting procedures. Parents, once fearful and uncertain, found themselves both reassured by these measures and forever changed, wiser, more vigilant, but also proud of the community their children had built together. For the families at the heart of the tragedy, the journey through grief was long and uneven. Hannah's mother became an advocate for victims' families, speaking at universities and town halls, her voice steady with the conviction of someone who had lost too much to ever accept silence. She and others like her pushed for trauma counseling and resources for survivors, ensuring that the city's wounds were acknowledged and tended to, not hidden away out of fear or shame. Detectives and prosecutors, too, bore the weight of what had happened. Many found themselves haunted by the faces of victims, driven to pursue every lead with greater care, knowing that missed details could mean the difference between justice and another cold case. Their work, now shaped by hard-won experience, led to a new era of collaboration between departments, between cities, even across state lines. The lesson was clear. Evil, when it comes, must be met with vigilance, unity, and relentless determination. And always, at the center of the city's renewal, was the reminder of what forensic science could accomplish. The DNA evidence that had cracked open Hannah's case became emblematic of a new era in criminal justice, a time when facts could speak for the silenced, when technology could pierce the shadows that predators rely on. Hannah's story, recounted in classrooms, news articles, and training seminars, underscored the simple, enduring truth that justice, though sometimes late, is never truly lost. But the story's impact was never only about laws or arrests. It was about the people who refused to give up, friends who searched in the snow, students who marched in candlelight, strangers who donated to reward funds, detectives who pored over files by sleepless lamplight. It was about the courage of those who dared to speak, breaking the silence that predators depend upon. It was about every parent who hugged their child tighter, every student who looked out for their friends, every survivor who found the strength to heal and to help others do the same. Years later, as new students arrived in Reno, the city had become a place of memory and meaning. The story of Hannah Carter was told not just as a warning, but as a legacy of hope. Her photo hung in a quiet corner of the campus, surrounded by handwritten notes and pressed flowers. The candlelight vigil each year drew crowds larger than ever, the silence broken only by the reading of names, reminders of those lost, and the promise that they would never be forgotten. In those moments, the city stood together, not just to mourn, but to insist on a better future. For Hannah, for Brianna, for every life touched by violence and injustice, Reno had learned a hard but necessary lesson. Evil thrives in darkness, but it cannot endure in the light of community, science, and the unbreakable will to remember. The Nevada wind still swept through the city, carrying with it stories, some dark, some bright, all a part of the fabric of life. And as long as Hannah Carter's name was spoken, as long as the lessons were honored, the city knew that justice, however slow, however hard won, would never be forgotten.